back to Check It Out, the Carnegie-Stout Public Library Adult Services Podcast. On today's episode, we have an interview with local poet Valorie Woerdehoff. We also have a few fun little pieces about things from the community, what they're doing to keep themselves entertained during this time. So,
I just wanted to share some things that I found on the internet lately that have been making me smile. It's something that passes the time if you're sitting at home, social isolating. Not everything on the internet is bad news these days. There's some really good stuff happening out there. There's authors and artists and entertainers and musicians galore out there that are putting free content out on the internet to keep us entertained. So essentially, it's like they're working at home, as are we. One of my favorite things right now is John Krasinski's. He's doing a little YouTube webcast called Some Good News. He's put out 2 episodes so far, and they are amazing. You can find him on YouTube. If you follow him on Twitter, he also tweets out the links. It's just, I laughed, I cried. They're about 15 minutes each. They're fantastic. LeVar Burton is doing LeVar Burton Reads. I know he's been reading Neil Gaiman books along with some other authors. He does readings for kids, for young adults, and also for adults. So if you just Google that, you could probably find the schedule. He does it on Twitter. He probably does it on YouTube. There's also Patrick Stewart is doing a sonnet a day. He's reading a sonnet a day, and he's doing that on Twitter. So if you just follow him on Twitter, you can find that as well. There's authors out there that are doing some great things. Like author Victoria Roth has a Twitch channel, and she is, through the whole month of April, she's connecting with other authors to talk about writing and writers. And it's just great that they're doing all of this free content just for us. They don't need to. I mean, they could be taking a vacation, but they're not. They're also working from home like we are. So if you have a favorite author, a favorite artist, a favorite musician, just Google them. See if they have a social media channel. Chances are they are doing something fantastic to keep us entertained, and there is a lot of great content out there right now. Not all the news is bad. There is good news, like John Krasinski says, and he's right. There is good news coming out. Everything is not doom and gloom. So if you have a chance, try those people. See if you can find something fun, and if you do find something fun, share it with us.
Yeah, absolutely. As you may have noticed, we've been posting for calls for recommendations for books on our Facebook page. So if you're looking for a good book to read, all you have to do is share what kind of books you like or what you're looking for, and then one of us will offer suggestions. So go ahead and comment, and then we'll get back to you fairly quickly, probably within a day or two, with a list of books that you might be interested in reading next. Another way that we are trying to keep everyone engaged are themed lists that we have on our website. So if you go to digital collections and then click on library catalog on the left-hand side, it'll bring you to our catalog page. And then at the top left of that page, you can click on list. We have featured lists like the New York Times bestsellers, a new fiction. Right now we have music memoirs, a couple of lists from last month, like Women's History Month, and we are working on creating more each week. If you click public lists at the top of that, there's also many previous ones from award winners to past readers of the month. So if you're looking for something there, that's a good place to start as well. So now we'll go ahead and pass it off to Sarah and her interview with our local poet, Valerie.
Today, I'm pleased to say that we have local poet Valorie Woerdehoff, who, along with her co-author Connie Armeester, we're going to kick off April National Poetry Month with a program at Carnegie-Stout on Saturday, April 4th. That didn't happen, so Valerie has graciously agreed to talk on our podcast. Valerie has been writing long and short poetry and essays for 40 years. She has published more than 400 pieces in juried journals and publications and garnered awards in national and international competitions. So welcome, Valerie.
Oh, thank you. I so appreciate it. Great to be with you, Sarah.
Yeah, this is a fun way to kick off our early morning. So I'll just start with a basic question here. What was your introduction to poetry?
Well, for this, I'm going to give a shout out to teachers because as a young child, I was diagnosed with rheumatic fever, and that meant that I couldn't go out and participate in recess or physical education activities. And so I had a wonderful 4th grade teacher who introduced me to poetry and to writing. And to be quite frank, now as an adult, I'm thinking she probably was trying to find things to keep me busy so that she could retain her a little time to herself while the other kids were out at PE or at recess. But for me, it was my introduction to poetry. And it stuck. I fell in love and I wrote really bad poetry at that point in my life, and probably still do. But anyway, on occasion, everyone
Sure.
does, and honestly should if you're a writer, because there's you need to be able to edit yourself. But back then, that was my introduction to poetry, and I am incredibly grateful.
That's wonderful. What, in your opinion, or like, how would you define poetry? What is poetry?
It's probably nowadays highly misunderstood and sadly a little bit ignored, but really it isn't, because I think we do hear poetry in music. I think we hear poetry in the hip hop music, poetry slams. I'm so grateful to see this coming generation sort of take hold of it, but we're not calling it poetry. But I think in many ways, poetry is part of the human soul. It has a lot more to do with music, with the visual arts, than it actually, I think, in many ways has to do with literature. And that's, I think, where the confusion is. And because it can be very evocative. And so people think, they kind of approach it like they maybe would a nonfiction book or something and then go, oh, I'm not getting this. Well, that's because it's asking you sometimes, not always, to take a little bit of a leap. But poetry too kind of throws people off a little bit, I think, because again, kind of like a piece, like a painting, if you will, there's as much in what is not talked about in a poem as there is in what is talked about. So the writer was, the writer was selected from the get-go. And unlike maybe some other kinds of writing, the poet is trying to tell you some kind of human truth. They're trying to tease it out. They're not trying to preach. Typically, the best poems, I think, are not trying to preach or say what we think you want to hear, some platitude, but rather trying to tease out some human truth, because they're trying to work it out for themselves as a writer, honestly. But by looking at at a small piece of life, instead of War and Peace, a large slice of life. So we're saying, let's look at this small piece and see if there isn't some innate human truth that we can all sort of ponder here. And so that's what a poem's trying to do. Now, that can sound a little heady, because honestly, sometimes poetry is just for fun. Sometimes it's just silly. Sometimes, and it should be. Do I wish we would pick it up at the checkout counter of the grocery store? Absolutely, because I think people think that I think we teach it wrong, and so people have come to think that poetry is something so difficult they'll never understand it. It's boring. I have to have like an MFA, Master's of Fine Arts, to get it. And I actually think good poetry should be none of that. It should speak to you. If it doesn't, then, that's okay. It's like art. Move on. It's fine.
Oh, yeah. I loved Shel Silverstein as a kid. And then I, somewhere along the way, was like, oh, poetry is too difficult. But you're right. It is like art. Some of it speaks to you, and some of it you're like, oh, that's well done, but I don't really care to have that in my living room.
I love Shel Silverstein.
Right.
I still love Shel Silverstein. I love kids' poetry. And I think part of the problem is like with art, although we again sort of lose this over the years, I think we give kids crayons and let them think they can do it, not let them think, and let them know that they can do it. Mm-hmm. With poetry, we kind of from the get-go say, you're probably not going to understand this and you're not going to write it very well, but go ahead and try. I mean, that's horrible. And then by the time you get to high school, nothing against, because there's wonderful teachers out there who are teaching it very, very well. So I don't mean to imply otherwise, but I've just ran into an awful lot of adults who were so turned off because they were told, oh, this means that, and this means this, and if you didn't get it, well, you're just dumb. Well, who wants to read that for fun? I mean, no, I don't. So same. I think that's some of it.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for new poets?
Absolutely. And I first of all, yay, new poets. Go, we need you. Honestly, as a culture, as a civilization, we need you. And when I talked about poetry being a lot like music, poetry used to be something that called the culture shared because people could remember it. They would repeat it over and over. People would memorize it. Even 150 years ago, poetry books were bestsellers because that's often how we learned scripture. That's how we learned for religious, in religions. But again, it was something, this is before computers and even sometimes way back before books, you could remember it. So often that's why it rhymed. Again, it had to do with music, that sort of rhythm. And so it was a very popular way of sharing culture. And nowadays, I think some of that's lost. But anyway, advice to new poets, because we're not as much surrounded by it in our culture, read poetry. Read as much as you can. Certainly write, and I think developing a practice of writing. I think sometimes people think, again, that writing's, again, I'm going to make the connection to art, that you wait for the muse to hit you, and any artist, a working artist will tell you, like any working writer, the muse isn't that reliable. Once in a while you get lucky, but most of the time, the muse is, comes and goes. So you need to develop like an athlete. Really, you need to write on days when you feel like you don't have anything to write about. You need to write, even if it's 10 minutes a day, because honestly, I've always worked. I had 5 kids. I've got 9 grandkids. I've had to fit it into the corners of my life, and I've been able to do that. Now, have I gotten to write everything I've ever wanted? Absolutely not. But I think it's really incredible. It's incredibly important to develop the practice. So setting aside, maybe it's 10 minutes at the end of the day or the beginning of the day, a half hour, however much your life will allow to write and to read. And nowadays, of course, we're all connected electronically. So there are so many listservs that are free where you can be getting a poem a day free. There are so many ways to connect with other writers across the globe. I have many writing friends that I have never met, and they can live in England, they can live in Australia, they can live in Seattle, and you can connect with each other, which is really a wonderful, wonderful thing. So I would say connect both locally, because we do have some great arts group here in town, and we get some folks that come and read. Take workshops if you get the chance. There's now online ones, community colleges, the local colleges. Connect, but read poetry. I think that kind of helps you develop a sense of what maybe good poetry is and what it isn't, because it's, like I said, it's kind of easy to write bad poetry. Not that I wouldn't encourage you to do that. I think everybody should write whatever poetry you can, honestly.
That's fair. Fair.
Yeah, and edit. I think some people forget, Sarah, that editing is a big part of it. I would say, like I said, once in a while the muse is kind and will give you like a wonderful found piece. But I would say by and large, most of the time, it's all in the editing.
So it's
which
not
often
like set in stone. When you write it, you can go back and change it.
And you should. I would say, after write, read, it would be edit. Seriously. And then maybe run it past some other people, because I know I write stuff all the time that I'll run past my husband or family, and I'll get this blank look at them going, okay, that one was me talking to myself. Okay, back to the drawing board. And that's perfectly fine. Sometimes you do write poems just for yourself, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's rather wonderful.
That's true. How has poetry helped you in your life?
Poetry for me has, I think it's helped me understand life better, and the world around me, and kept that sense of curiosity and wonder. And as a writer, I would have to say it's helped me process life, because that's sort of now, that is how I process the world, I think, is some people it's verbally, maybe some people they're out, I don't know, they're athletes, and so it's a physical interaction. I think for me, that's how I process life. and I'm hoping to be leaving breadcrumbs, but I love to read the breadcrumbs other people have left. Interesting, through what we're going through right now, I'm seeing a lot more poetry on like Facebook and things, because people are going back to some of those ones that they held dear at maybe an earlier time in their life.
That makes a lot of sense. And speaking to that, how can poets help in times like this, and what should they be doing?
That's a good question. And it's one that I asked myself early on in this, because to be super honest, I went through a spell at the beginning where reading and writing poetry sort of seemed frivolous. It sort of seemed like something left for days when we didn't have these kinds of worries and stresses. And then as this has progressed, I think it has actually become something that I've kind of clung to as a life preserver, because again, it's reading other people processing the world. And you know what? We've been through things before as a culture. So reading maybe some poets from times when we had other kinds of distress, maybe it was wars or the depression, or other kinds of pandemics, the Spanish flu or something, and reading what came out of those and how they got through them. And then with my own writing, and then current writers, I'm now starting to see writers are engaging with what's going on. And I think because I process the world, that's a natural for me, but I also think it's incredibly important. We have to document this time, and we have to try and figure out what it means as a culture, what it means to human society, to each of us individually, what we're experiencing, because it's a little like being a photographer. We've got this snapshot in time, and we need to record it, I think, for ourselves in the future.
I agree. I think it's a very valuable service to all of us. Just as you are processing through things in your creation, by getting to experience that, it will help those of us who are more of the readers look at things from the new angles and different perspectives.
Well, and I hope visual artists, I hope artists, across the globe are taking the time, as best they can in these circumstances, to also capture it, to process it, to help us all kind of tease this out. And I'm starting to even see folks like on the poetry side starting to put together anthologies. So they're asking writers out there to be deliberately recording, if you will, and sending those to folks so that they can put it together, so that we can have this time documented, honestly. So
I don't know how much you listen to NPR, but I'm a bit of a radio junkie. They have a reoccurring feature where they do collaborative poetry, and they put one out this week of the quarantine experience that was really powerful. So I don't know if you've gotten to see that, but I highly recommend it.
Oh, I am going to have to go look at that. Oh, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll send it to you I'll send it to you in an email. I think I still have the link somewhere, but it was excellent. I think this went pretty well. Is there anything we didn't cover that you wanted to throw out there?
No, I think this was great. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Before we let you go, we are going to have you read one of your poems out loud for us.
Well, this one actually comes out of being a mom, and recognize at a certain point that there's certainly deficits that I have, but that all of my children were probably raised going to poetry readings. So this is called Women's Work. Other mothers teach their daughters to sew dresses, smock tops, quilt, and cook, to make of their time something useful, something to wear or eat. I teach my daughters to stitch words, to stir syllables, patch dreams and adjectives into a whole, to whip similes and based visions. We embroider our internal rhyme, not thoughts, hem images, seam together sounds and smells. We bake verbs and nouns, slow cooking the mess, and arrive at our church bazaar, rumpled paper in hand, wrapped in plastic, poems for sale. Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Ugh, I don't know what it is, but poetry just always works so much better for me when I hear it out loud.
And it's exactly what I'm saying about the music.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be heard. It's supposed to be heard. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much. Did we forget anything else?
No, that was wonderful. Thanks for taking the time and for the library doing all of this and all the amazing things you guys do, from 3D printing to, oh my gosh, lending out cake pan.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Valerie and Sarah.
So Sarah, what have you been enjoying reading, watching, listening to while we've been...
Well, to be perfectly honest, I have not been reading, aside from the big library read online book discussion book, which I did really enjoy the audiobook for. But other than that, I have not been reading. I have been binge watching TV. So my husband and I recently finished Steven Universe. They just had a last season come out, Steven Universe feature, and it was everything that I loved about the show, where it starts out fun and wonderful and then gets darker and darker and darker, but then it has a positive, uplifting message at the end. So that was wonderful. And then we watched the new HBO series of Watchmen, which is really well done, but an incredibly dark dystopia. So that was super weird to sit there and like binge watch 3 episodes of this dystopia and get out of it and be like, well, I'm glad I don't live there. Instead, I live in this dystopia where I'm trapped in my house.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, I've been reading cozy mysteries because I don't have to think about them, but honestly, usually I listen to 80s music on Sirius XM, but I upgraded myself to the 90s music.
Ooh,
just to switch it up a little bit. Ooh. Which, that's when I was in high school in the 90s, so I just, dated myself right there. So,
are you getting the grunge rock or more of the like pop music?
It's all of it, and
nice.
I just sing along at home. So that's what I've been doing to entertain myself, although I've been watching a ton of television just for background noise. So
does it
that's what I've been doing.
Make you sad for me to tell you that I was born in the 90s?
Yes, it does.
little bit, yes.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, so that 80s music
Are you a Gen Z, Becky?
No, not quite. I'm still at the tail end of millennial, so.
Yeah, what am I?
So
I don't even know.
Amy, you're Gen X, aren't you?
I think I am.
Because millennial starts like 84.
It depends. Anywhere from 1980 to like 1984, yeah. So I'm like possibly the first millennial and you're possibly the last millennial.
There you go.
Oh my gosh. And I am solidly a Gen Xer, so...
We cover the range of experiences.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh boy.
You were talking about dystopias, Sarah. I'm currently reading Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, and that's kind of scary because it's this post-apocalyptic world, but it happened after a major flu pandemic. So yeah, it's kind of like the car crash that you can't look away from, so you just lean into it. And so I'm like, I'm gonna read this book. It's been on my list forever. And it's kind of scary, but luckily it's more about the like aftermath rather than what's going on during the flu, because that would probably freak me out a lot more.
So I know you guys have probably all either seen or read The Stand by Stephen King.
I have not read it, but it's on my list because of this.
Obviously in that book, there's like this huge virus that takes out a lot of the country, a lot of the world, and then people kind of fall into 2 different factions. You're like the good or the evil, and the good people all congregate in Boulder, Colorado.
Oh, okay.
Because Stephen King has a really soft spot in his heart for Boulder. And then all the bad people congregate in Las Vegas because obviously it's, Sin City. And the funny thing is, I'm from Colorado, so all of my friends who live in Colorado were talking about how they're all going to make their way up to Boulder and they, it's a really short trip for them because they're all still in Colorado. And that somebody needs to find Mother Abigail, who is kind of like the prophet for the good people. And she lives somewhere in Nebraska. So I said, well, I have to drive through Nebraska to get to Colorado. So I'll just swing by and pick her up on my way to Boulder. So that's been the running joke that my friends and I have had on Facebook.
Yeah.
We've got a plan.
We've got a
There you
plan.
go.
We do. Yes.
I also have been trying to read Emma, the Jane Austen book,
Oh,
since they
yeah.
had that new adaptation. I've read other Jane Austen before, but I hadn't read Emma, but I wanted to see the new release. So I figured I should probably read it before I watched it.
Just, you could just watch Clueless.
That's
I was
true.
just going to say, Clueless is my favorite ever.
Yes.
I've seen
Yeah.
Clueless, but it was many, many years ago. So
It holds up pretty well.
It does, yeah.
but
Oh, Gizmo says
Ooh.
hello.
Gizmo!
special guest star.
Yeah, he doesn't like it when my attention is not on him, so.
Luckily, my dogs are quieter this time than last time. So
Yeah.
And to finish off today's episode, we have a couple of little pieces from Abby and Michelle's, two of our listeners, about what they've been enjoying during this time.
Hi, this is Abby, the cataloger at Carnegie-Stout. I am working my way through Winston Graham's Pull Dark series, which is historical fiction set in Cornwall in the 18th and 19th centuries. The novels have adventure and romance, the characters are complicated and memorable, and the descriptions of the rugged Cornish landscape are gorgeous. If you happen to prefer watching over reading, you are in luck. These novels were recently developed into a television series which aired on PBS for 5 seasons. Either offers a great deal of escapism, which is much appreciated right now.
thanks, Abby. Next up, we have Michelle.
Hello, my name is Michelle. I'm a library assistant in the circulation department at the Carnegie-Stout. Like many of you, I stocked up on as many books as I could before the library closed. I'm currently reading The Deep by Alma Katsu. It combines all my favorite genres. It is a thriller, a ghost story, a mystery, a romance, and is a historical fiction all rolled into one. It's about the Titanic, its survivors, and the aftermath years later. It's a very good read.
If there's anything that you've been enjoying watching, reading, or listening to, please record a short audio file and email it to us at yourlibrarian@dubuque.lib.ia.us to include in a future podcast.
Thanks for listening. We'd like to give a big thank you to Valerie for being our special guest on today's episode of the Adult Services Podcast. We would also like to thank Abby and Michelle for their submissions. And as always, a big thank you to Ben Eagle for performing and recording the music for the Carnegie-Stout Adult Services Podcast. We'll see you next time.